We don't. The trainings, we've only got a few trainings together on a couple Sundays, and then we just get to play in the Chiefs colours at Eden Park. So, although in the future I'd like to see it happen, I think this is just what's needed to get us kicked off the ground, and then see what happens in the future.
Yeah, how confident are you that there will be, like you say, there'll be a full competition next year?
I know that just with the ban after the release yesterday, that other franchises are asking a lot of questions, and they're pretty keen to be part of it. So, yeah, I'm willing to say I'm pretty confident that there definitely will be something next year.
Are there enough women's players at that top class level for it?
Yeah, look, I think you only need to look at the FPC and the level of that now in the top games. Then picking down from 12 FPC teams to 4 or 5 Super Rugby teams, you're going to have the cream of the crop. So, yeah, there's definitely the talent there, and I think that it's just the next step that's needed to bridge the gap between Wharapama Cup and Black Ferns. So it just gives girls another opportunity to show what they got.
Fantastic. Look, thank you very much. All the best for May the 1st. Karen Blackfern, Chiefs Women's Player 2, Chelsea Alley there, ending the programme. Kia pai tō rā. Back tomorrow.
The Laysan Albatross.
Would you like to? Yeah. Okay, I'll just make sure we've got everybody here and set up and ready to go. And you hated the rain coming in, and I was celebrating the fact that some of that will be pouring into our storage lakes. As long. Okay, yep, that's good. And hopefully the weather will work itself out before Easter, is the last thing I'll say. Welcome along this morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm joined this morning by the Chief Executive of Auckland Council, Jim Stabak, who was the person who actually commissioned the group that carried out the review. You have received a copy of the independent review of health and safety at the ports of Auckland, and I want to speak to the background to commissioning that review. I want to speak to the main recommendations of it, and I want to speak to the next steps. Last August, Pala'amo Kalati was killed in an industrial accident at the ports of Auckland. He was the third fatality in as many years at the ports. As Mayor, I was deeply concerned that this accident rate reflected a serious systemic problem in health and safety at the ports. A month earlier, I received a report from Maritime New Zealand into the death of Leslie Gelberger, a swimmer in the harbour who was hit by a harbour pilot boat. What I read in that report disturbed me. He was hit by a vessel that was doing 7 times the legal speed limit. This was absolutely consistent pattern of breaking the law in terms of the speed by the port's boats, and there were no systems in place, according to Maritime New Zealand, to ensure that there were controls on the speed limit by boats in an area that was dangerous. In 2018, Laboom Dyer was killed at the port when his straddle carrier overturned. The report on that actually didn't come out until after I'd commissioned the review of port safety. It came out in December last year, but what WorkSafe revealed in that report I found appalling. Laboom had triggered the trip alarm on the straddle carrier he was driving 97 times during the shift on which he was killed. He had used a cell phone 64 times while driving, and he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. This is further evidence that there was a widespread breach of health and safety rules without adequate monitoring and enforcement of those rules, and operating under a system where a bonus incentivised people to drive quickly without balancing that with the need to drive safely. Auckland Council is the 100% shareholder of Ports of Auckland. It has, however, no legal power to involve itself in operational issues at the port, which operates independently and commercially under the Ports Companies Act. Governance and oversight are legally the responsibility of the Ports Board. However, I and Council believe that as owners, we had the responsibility to review health and safety conditions at the port, which was clearly a serious problem. The governing body of Council and Jim Stabbock as the Chief Executive all strongly supported my proposal to set up the review. It was commissioned by Council through Jim, and it was funded by the ports, but the review is independent of both bodies. The group commissioned to carry it out, Construction Health and Safety New Zealand, are experts in the area of workplace safety. Their report, which we have released this morning, is unredacted in the interests of openness and transparency. What the report concludes is, and I want to quote, "There are systemic problems in Ports of Auckland Limited in relation to critical health and safety risk management and organisational culture related to health and safety. The reviewers found that there was a need, and again I quote, for significant improvement to ensure that Ports of Auckland Limited operates a resilient and appropriate control environment reflective of the level of inherent risk in port operations." The purpose of the report was not simply to confirm there was a problem. Rather, it was to provide a set of recommendations as a blueprint for fixing that problem, and I believe that it has done so. Its key specific recommendations include a requirement on the Chief Executive to prioritise safety over productivity and profitability, to actively promote safety and better engage with employees on it, to change risk behaviour and to resource corrective actions. Management and frontline leaders need to focus on safety as a core value. The dysfunctional relationship between Maritime New Zealand, a dysfunctional relationship between the Maritime Union and the ports management needs to be replaced with one based on trust. There needs to be a more consistent approach to critical risks and implementation of effective controls. The new Health and Safety Senior Manager needs to be transformational, and that person needs to report directly to both the Chief Executive Officer and the Board. As a Council, we've already taken steps within our powers to ensure that the problem is fixed. That includes appointing new directors with specific skills in the area of health and safety. In February, Hazel Armstrong was appointed to the Board. She is a Wellington lawyer specialising in health and safety and will be utterly focused on ensuring that the recommendations which have been made are implemented. Finally, I want to comment on the next steps to be taken. Last week, we had the Chief Executive Officer of the Ports, Tony Gibson, and the Chair of the Board, Bill Osborne, before the Council-controlled Organisation Oversight Committee. I secured an acknowledgement at that point from the Board Chair that the culture of health and safety at the ports had been poor and that the Board was fully committed to implementing the recommendations of the review. They've repeated that today in their press statement. I welcome that acknowledgement and the commitment, and I now expect health and safety to get the priority that is required in this as in all industries. I expect the Board and the new Health and Safety Committee, which has been set up, to ensure that the recommendations are implemented without delay and that compliance with health and safety rules are monitored and enforced. Effective health and safety rules, compliance with those rules, and a culture consistent with prioritising safe work conditions are not a nice-to-have requirement. They are a vital component of good management in any enterprise. Council will require from ports a regular report on the changes being made and the progress in implementing the recommendations of the review. This, like the review report itself, will be public, and as it will be public, it will be a mechanism by which the Council and the public will hold Ports of Auckland to account for a vastly improved working environment there that is safe. Families of workers at the port need to know that the family member that they love that goes to work in the morning will return home safely to them in the evening. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Those are my general comments in response to the review report, which I welcome, and I now look forward to any questions that you might have.
Has there been a total breakdown of relationships between Ports of Auckland and pretty much everyone else?
Well, there's certainly been a breakdown of relationships between Ports of Auckland and management, and the union, I should say. That breakdown of relationships between management and union cannot be allowed to stop both parties focusing on the utter necessity of a safe working environment where people are not at risk of being killed or seriously injured.
How did it get to that point? Whose fault is it? Who's to blame for that breakdown?
Well, you know, there's an old saying, it takes two to tango, and both sides now need to accept responsibility for working together, in particular to ensure a safe working environment, and I'm sure that they will.
Mr. Goff, were you shocked by the report's findings? It's quite damning, particularly of management and the Chief Executive.
I think I was most shocked when I read the original reports by Maritime New Zealand and WorkSafe on the circumstances in which two of the people were killed at ports. The fact that those were quote-unquote accidents, but were caused by a total breakdown of the monitoring and enforcement of rules and the lack of a safety culture at the ports. That's what shocked me. That's what led me to take what is quite an extraordinary step as a shareholder to commission an independent review of health and safety.
Were you not shocked to see that profit had been put ahead of health and safety?
I think it's utterly unacceptable that you build profit or productivity on the backs of injuries and deaths of workers. No industry accepts that that should happen, including the ports, and they need now to address what was a serious situation. The call to put safety ahead of profitability and productivity was made not by me as an elected representative, but rather by the health and safety reviewers themselves, who are expert in this area.
Were you and Council then keeping a close enough eye on what's been going on at the ports, and have you dropped the ball?
No, we haven't dropped the ball at all. I think we moved with remarkable speed following the death of Pala'amo Kalati to institute this review. I read the Maritime Review in July. The latest death at the ports occurred in August. I asked for the review to take place in September, and then we got the report of the death of La Boom Dyer in December that justified everything that we had done. So I don't accept that we dropped the ball at all. We moved with incredible speed to address a serious situation in a way that I don't think any other shareholder group in the country has done before.
But it took those deaths to get to that point. You must have known, were you not aware that there were other health and safety issues going on at the port? That the port was struggling with automation, that there were all these other issues going on?
There are a lot of issues at the port, but if we focus on health and safety, the responsibility of Council is the responsibility as a shareholder. It does not have the legal role or authority to deal with operational matters. That's the way in which the legislation has been set up. Notwithstanding that, we have intervened, we've intervened quickly, and this report has been produced in record time to produce real change at the ports, and I'm proud that we have made that achievement at this point.
Do you have confidence in the board and the Chief Executive at ports?
The question of confidence in the Chief Executive is a matter for the Ports of Auckland Board by law. I don't hire and I don't fire the Chief Executive. I do, however, participate along with the Chief Executive of Council in the appointment of new ports directors, and we have acquired that role following a change that I instigated to remove a group called the Auckland Council Investment Limited, which was a barrier between the council as the shareholder and the ports. Having done that, we are now active in ensuring we have a regenerated board that will deal seriously not only with the problem of health and safety, but the other myriad problems that are occurring at the wharf. Of the 2 new directors, one, Hazel Armstrong, is an absolute expert in health and safety, and that is really important. She's not only an expert in health and safety, but those of you that know her know that she's a bit of a Rottweiler in ensuring that when things are required to happen by the management, they will happen. And I'm sure that she, together with Peter Crisp, who's the other new director appointed, also with a background in health and safety in his past, that will help ensure and drive the board to do the job that it needs to do in governance and oversight.
Do you have confidence in the board to hold the chief executive and the management accountable for moving forward in terms of implementing the recommendations in the report?
All new appointees to the board, and a number are in the pipeline at the moment, will be in no doubt as to their role in ensuring proper oversight and governance of the chief executive and management at the port. I'm confident of that.
And what are the consequences for the board if they don't do that?
If the board doesn't carry out its role, then they would be replaced with people who do. I am confident that the new people appointed to the board, which now also has a new chair, will take steps to carry out the recommendations of this review, and they've committed themselves to doing so, and we will hold them to account to ensure that they do so.
Can you outline those other issues at the port you've talked about a couple of times? There are...
Well, there are a number of issues at the port. Health and safety is at the top, as it ought to be. But there is also a problem with congestion at the port, significantly caused by supply chain difficulties because of COVID-19, but exacerbated by the fact that less than half of the cranes at the ports were able to be used because they had a staffing shortage. I am also concerned that there has been a delay in the implementation of automation, which further complicates the congestion question, partly caused, no doubt, by COVID-19, but it's now a year overdue. I'm also concerned that the ports have had, over a number of years, a declining return on equity invested in the report, are paying a declining dividend, and are losing their competitiveness in the ports market in New Zealand. Those are all problems that need to be fixed.
So it's in a pretty bad way.
Sorry?
It's in a pretty bad way.
Those are real problems that need to be fixed, but I'm confident that a port that serves a third of the country's population has the ability to get back on its feet, to do the job that's required of it, and to return to profitability.
How would you, sorry, that there's no safety assurances around that automation, so that seems like an ongoing concern. Does that need to be suspended?
Well, it's not fully implemented at the moment, but one of the recommendations is in relation to the automation process, and the Ports Board have indicated that they will ensure that those recommendations are followed, and they should be.
How would you compare Ports of Auckland's performance against Ports of Tauranga?
Well, Ports of Auckland has had a declining share of the market in New Zealand, and Ports of Tauranga has had an increasing share. Ports of Tauranga is more profitable and produces a better dividend and a better return on equity, and that's an indication that changes need to be made at the Ports of Auckland to restore their competitiveness and their profitability.
Do you sort of look at Ports of Auckland and say, you know, how the heck are they doing so well when Ports of Auckland are performing poorly?
I think that it's important that Ports of Auckland perform to their full capacity, and they haven't been doing so.
The report is pretty clear in saying that the tone of safety comes from the chief executive and management, and I get that the board, you know, will bring those people in. But do you think Tony Gibson, given he's been in that role throughout all of these injuries and deaths, is the right person for that job?
That's a decision that the Ports Board needs to make. They are the people that have the authority to appoint and to remove the chief executive and to ensure that management follows the role that it should do, and that's what I expect the board to do, to exercise proper oversight and governance over management. That's the role of a board of directors. They need to fulfil it.
Bill Osborne and Tony Gibson last week at the council, were you confident, looking at them and hearing what they had to say, that they had this under control?
I am confident in reading their statements and listening to what they said in reply to questions from me and others, that they now accept the seriousness of the situation in terms of health and safety and will make the changes necessary. But confidence isn't enough. We will be monitoring them closely to ensure that the recommendations are put in place as quickly as possible and we create a safe working environment for people at the port.
Is Tony Gibson on notice? Like, is there a period if he's...
That's a question you would need to put to the port's board, who have the authority to appoint and to remove their chief executive. I don't have that power.
Just to confirm the process with the report, were any changes made by the ports of Auckland into what has been released now?
I don't know the details of the process that occurred between the reviewers and the ports, other than the normal process was followed, that in the interests of natural justice, the ports were given the opportunity to fact check what is said. I'm sure that the reviewers would say that this report is their report, that they accept ownership of it, and that they have reached their conclusions independently and without dictation from either the council or the port's management.
Have you been able to understand why it took several weeks for it to be released?
It took longer than I wanted, and I made that clear at the time, and that I wanted that report before the end of this month, and I've got it.
What was the hold-up?
The fact-checking process was taking longer than it ought to have. I think you'd need to ask the reviewers why that was. That's not something that I had responsibility over.
The reviewers were the port though, right?
No, the reviewers were Construction Health and Safety New Zealand, who are quite independent of the report. While the construction industry is different from the ports, the waterfront industry, they had the skill sets that gave them the expertise and the experience to put their finger on what was going wrong at the ports and to make recommendations to create a blueprint to fix those problems. And that's what's important about this report. You know, it was clear that there was a problem at the ports, and they confirmed that. But much more importantly than that, they've set a blueprint which they have set for the ports now to put into practice to fix that problem, and that needs to happen without delay.
May have been more concise. The port checked the report for a period of a week or two, I understand. Are you concerned that had to happen and didn't come straight to council?
The report, the initial report, went to the Chief Executive of Council and the Chief Executive of Ports. The reason that it went to Ports was for the purpose of fact-checking, excuse me, which is normal in this process. And of course there has to be natural justice principles followed, but I absolutely have faith in the integrity and the strength of the reviewers to provide a report that they think accurately reflects the situation at the ports, and I don't believe that they've pulled their punches in that regard. They've said that there were systemic problems, there is a need for significant improvement, and they've spelt out what that improvement should be, and that is appropriate.
Are you frustrated by the council's lack of teeth in dealing with the port and this barrier that's created by
Sorry, am I frustrated by the
council's lack of teeth when dealing with the port due to the act?
I'm sorry, I'm missing the lack of
Teeth.
teeth. Okay. The Ports Company Act is what the Ports Company Act is. It says that council shouldn't be running the port operationally. They should be at arm's length, that the port is required to act independently and commercially. But I have restored the link that enables us to ensure that the port is accountable to its shareholders, which is the process of involvement that we now have in the appointment of directors. We did not have that role under the system that was set up in 2010 for the new council. So we have removed the barrier to the shareholder being able to appoint directors that we have confidence in that will ensure good governance and oversight of management. That's pretty vital.
There has yet to be any any charges or updates relating to Amo Kalati's death? Do you know if Maritime New Zealand is any closer to its...
I don't know. I don't involve myself. They run independently. I have seen reports that they hope to make a formal report on the circumstances of Amo's death before the end of the year, and I hope that happens. It would be better, obviously, if we had a more timely report from Maritime New Zealand and, for that matter, WorkSafe, but they must get on and do their job. And in terms of the job they did in relation to La Boom Dyer, they certainly didn't pull their punches either. They were straight up and down, and if you read that report, you can see how serious the situation was.
With Maritime New Zealand, though, by the end of the year, that's a long time since that death. Do you get the impression that the Ports is in any way holding up that investigation?
No, I think, address that question by all means to Maritime New Zealand, but I don't think it's the delay is occasioned by Ports, but they are the people that could most effectively comment on that. I'm not privy to that information.
How long do you think these systemic health and safety issues have been going on at the port?
From the reports that I've read over the time that I've been mayor, they've been going on for at least that length of time. It's 3 fatalities in 3 years is enough to trigger the alarm that something is going wrong at the ports, and it certainly triggered that alarm with me.
How did it get to that point then, if it's a relatively long-standing issue?
Well, that's a question I think you should best address when you talk to the ports management and their board. Both management and board have been there, or those that remain on the board have been there for a long time, and they could best explain to you why it got to that situation. It has got to that situation. It needed to change. This report will be a catalyst in getting that change, and those changes need to be made as quickly as possible in the interests of everybody's fundamental right to go to work in a safe workplace and to come home at the end of the day safely.
Were you disappointed by resignations on the board in recent months while there are all these issues at the board?
No.
You didn't think that it was kind of jumping ship when there's a lot of things that need resolving?
No, the chair of the board had signalled that she had been there for a long period of time and that she intended to step down, and she has done so. Okay, I think that's it. We've covered everything at least twice. Thank you very much for being here today. I'm available for about a quarter of an hour if there's any individual questions that you'd like to put to me. Thank you, Jim. Right.
Pretty sure that I'm going to go down the full IVF route, so that is going to be probably just shy of $20,000. So it's significant.
It's interesting, Andrew. Also, I understand it was just a few years ago the World Health Organisation changed the classification of infertility to include single men